Before we get into the newspaper, I just wanted to apologize for it taking a month or so between videos. Sometimes in life, I have to prioritize things. I love reading the newspaper to you guys. I like reading it to myself also. I do hope to get on a consistent schedule with these programs. I realize that this channel won't get subscribers if I won't put in the effort. Welcome to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Wednesday, January 22nd, 1941. Henry Chopp reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:12 a.m. It set at 4:52 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, mostly cloudy, occasional light rain, changing to light snow and colder by late afternoon today. Tomorrow, cloudy, occasionally light snow in the morning, much colder, cold wave tonight and tomorrow, moderate east to northeast winds today. The low temperature, 26 degrees. The high temperature, 45. Today's headline, Acts to Block Dictator Bill. Washington, D.C., January 21st. Representative Hamilton Fish, Republican, New York, in a radio speech tonight listed the amendments the opposition will offer to President Roosevelt's Lend-Lease bill to deprive it of dictatorship provisions. He outlined also a substitute bill he will offer tomorrow to aid Great Britain and speed up the production of armament. The principal amendments to the president's bill that will be offered, said Mr. Fish, would be, number one, prohibit the president giving away any part of our Navy without the consent of Congress. Number two, prohibit the president from sending convoys into the war zones without the consent of Congress. Number three, limit the operation of the bill to 1 year or 2 years. Number four, restrict the financial obligations under the measure to $2 billion. Number five, limit or define Section 3, giving the president power to repeal existing statutes. Number six, prohibit the building, repair, or outfitting of belligerent warships of any nation in either government or private shipyards within the United States as being a direct violation of our own laws, treaties, and international law. Number seven, require that the British give security for materials and equipment loaned or leased to them until their funds are exhausted. Ambassador Kennedy warned that American blood will be shed on foreign soil if the United States allies herself with Britain. To meet the challenge to offer a constructive substitute, Representative Fish said he will introduce a bill that will expedite production and aid for Great Britain without the Congress surrendering its war-making powers or control of the purse strings to the president. While the strategy of those in opposition to the Roosevelt dictator bill has not been definitely decided upon, it has tentatively been proposed to push both the new bill and the amendments at once with the idea of working out a compromise on the House floor. My bill, Mr. Fish explained, authorizes the administrator of the Federal Loan Agency to lend, lease, or otherwise dispose of not more than $2 billion to the British government to enable it to purchase supplies including munitions, airplanes, and merchant ships in the United States or its possessions. The administrator is authorized to lend the sums made available under the terms of this bill to the British government on the best available security obtainable and in case of the exhaustion of British dollar securities in America to arrange for repayment in gold or rubber, tin, tea, or other non-competitive commodities. The administrator is hereby granted the broadest powers to finance British war needs and, if necessary, to make actual grants of credit without requiring any collateral to finance the purchasing of British war needs in the United States. The administrator shall make an accounting each month to Congress of the expenditures and commitments as well as the nature of the securities and collateral obtained. This proposal is so simple that it could be adopted by the Congress in 10 days and thereby have the advantage of expediting loans or credit to Great Britain and accomplishing the will of 90% of the American people without destroying our free institutions and representative and constitutional form of government. Refusal by the president to accept such compromise, said Fish, would show that the Lend-Lease plan is a camouflage for the usurpation of the war-making and appropriating powers of Congress. The congressman said that Wendell Willkie had endorsed the president's bill 100% apparently without reading it and then had urged important amendments. Mr. Willkie, said Fish, would be more helpful to his party if he would refrain from public comment on such a vital foreign and constitutional issues until he has time to analyze them. He has unintentionally hampered the opposition and encouraged proponents of the pending bill that seek to strip Congress of its constitutional functions over the purse and sword and set up a one-man government in the United States. There could be no compromise unless the president's Lend-Lease bill is drastically amended. The responsibility for any delay rests not on the Congress, but squarely on the president for demanding dangerous, excessive, and un-American dictatorial powers, which will be fought to the end in both the House and the Senate. Passage of the president's bill, said Fish, would create a despotism such as has existed in peacetime only in Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and communist Russia. Under the guise of expediting aid to Great Britain, it is a grab for power, he charged. I denounce it without reservation as a dictator bill and clearing the way to war. I wish to help to save Britain, but I have sworn to defend the Constitution of the United States, and that I propose to do first. Fish ridiculed the fear-compelling invasion talk of administration witnesses before the House committee as enough to make the angels weep. Secretary of War Stimson finally admitted, said Fish, that we had the greatest navy in the world and the only invasion to be feared would be from airplanes, particularly by establishing bases in Newfoundland and in South America. Just what our mighty navy would be doing as the Nazis or any other foreign nation seized and built airplane bases in Newfoundland and South America, I cannot ascertain from any of the cabinet officers. However, I propose to call Colonel Charles Lindbergh as an expert aviation witness before the committee next Thursday to answer these loose and unsubstantiated statements. Almost a year ago, he urged the administration to acquire air bases in Latin America as the most vital part of our national defense. Washington, D.C., January 21st. A forthright warning that American blood will be shed on foreign shores if the United States allies herself with Great Britain was given to Congress today by Joseph P. Kennedy, retiring ambassador to England. Kennedy repeated the plea he had made in a radio broadcast Saturday night in which he argued against the Roosevelt War Dictatorship Bill, which is being considered by the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He urged aid to Great Britain, but not to the point at which war would be inevitable, but where his prepared radio statement had been a stately discussion of principles consonant with the dignity of the nation's ranking diplomat. Kennedy's testimony today was pungent, often couched in homely phrases, and thereby carrying much force. If we get into this war, is it your studied opinion that the sending of another American expeditionary force abroad will be involved, he was asked. If you get in, replied Kennedy, you can make up your mind the boys are going over there, and there will be twice as many this time. Perhaps the surest manner of involving the United States would be to convoy cargo ships with American armed vessels, Kennedy said. In the case of the sinking of an American vessel, this nation would probably be more angered and more anxious to go to war than the enemy, he declared. It's more a question, said Kennedy, of what would happen among our own people in case a convoy ship were sunk with American men on board. If you could assure me that the American people would not want to declare war if one of our ships were blown up, I would have no objection to convoy, but I can't believe it. Reports have been current that the president contemplates sending convoys, and Secretary of State Cordell Hull gave strength to the stories by refusing to discuss the matter except privately with members of the committee. President Roosevelt was asked at his press conference whether the sending of American convoys was being considered. He dismissed the idea as preposterous, using his latest favorite phrase, "It was cow over the moon stuff," he remarked. Persons close to the president said his attitude was that convoys were an invitation to shooting and that he wanted to avoid any incidents which might involve an attack on an American vessel. Ambassador Kennedy's exchanges with questioning congressmen kept the great crowd constantly murmuring its admiration. This was in face of the fact that the audience, as always, was intensely pro-British. Kennedy at one time remarked that he found this warlike sentiment in Washington and New York, but nowhere else. I feel we can give all the aid possible to the British without the passage of this bill, which confers upon the president unheard of authority, he told the committee. What Great Britain wants is guns, tanks, planes, not legislation. Is there anything in the measure which will speed up our production here? Several congressmen complained that they have not yet been given an idea of the amount of assistance required by the British in terms of billions of dollars. Sums from $1 billion to $10 billion have been mentioned as the first possible appropriations to be suggested by the president if he gets his new bill. I can't tell you that, said Kennedy, but I can tell you this, that England is spending 1/2 of its national income. If we did that, we'd be spending $40 billion a year. The witness insisted time after time in response to questions that there were no secret agreements with the British within his knowledge. He was ambassador from December 10th, 1937 until October 22nd, 1940, when he left London to come home and resign. Describing what he found as the confused state of mind of the American people, Kennedy said he found himself in somewhat the same predicament. Everyone says he wants to help Britain, but we also don't want to go to war, he told the committee. There's a feeling here that war is inevitable, but you don't find it elsewhere. People can't understand why you can't give all possible aid to Britain without going to war to do it. Representative Hamilton Fish, Republican, New York, questioned Kennedy about reports sedulously spread by interventionists that Great Britain faces a crisis in 60 to 90 days. Great Britain has been in a crisis since September 3rd, 1939, which was, by the way, the day England declared war on Germany, said Kennedy. It became acute last June. If by crisis you mean that England will fall in 60 to 90 days, I don't know on what that could be based. The situation has been very critical since the fall of France. Kennedy was asked by Representative Carl Munt, Republican, South Dakota, whether anything has happened recently to make the situation worse for Britain. There has been an intensification of the night raids, Kennedy remarked. To offset that, there were the English victories in the Mediterranean. British production has been maintained. The ports are in quite good shape, although congested. The situation is certainly not any more critical now than when I left in October. The British situation as far as shipping is concerned will become serious and vital if the rate of destruction of ships continues at the rate previous to last month, Kennedy added. Asked whether the United States would not be in bad shape no matter whether it entered the war or not, and no matter who was the victor, Kennedy said with emphasis, "You can't possibly help being better off out of war. There isn't anything left for us if we go in." Democracy went out the window in England with the coming of war, the ambassador said. If the war lasts 2 or 3 years longer and Russia remains neutral, he added, communism may sweep Western Europe. Kennedy said he could not agree with persons who thought the president was trying to get the United States into war. I can't conceive of anyone trying to get us into the war, he said. Representative George H. Tinkham, Republican Massachusetts, inquired whether Kennedy did not think the American people should be given the information he, meaning Kennedy, transmitted to the president in his reports about European conditions. It was entirely a question of policy for the president to determine, the witness answered. The State Department has rejected legislative demands that it make public the diplomatic reports of Kennedy and William C. Bullitt, former ambassador to France. The two reports were said recently by Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, to have differed sharply on the course the United States should pursue in the war. The reports will not even be submitted for confidential study by congressional committees, it was said. Kennedy expressed wonderment that a British army of 300,000 had been permitted to escape at Dunkirk after France succumbed. If the German strength was as great as they said it was, he commented, I never could understand why they permitted that escape when they had a chance to wipe out the real strength of Britain. Noting that Britain's anti-aircraft and balloon barrages never had been very effective, Kennedy asserted, if the Germans have strength to assume command of the air, the crisis might come at any moment. But they haven't indicated that they have that strength. On the other hand, Kennedy, discussing the possibility of a British victory, remarked, entirely from numbers, I don't see how 1,500,000 men can drive back 6 million men armed to the teeth unless there is a revolution in those countries. The man who spent nearly 3 years in England as the official representative of this country and was in the closest touch with the highest officials was asked whether he knew the war aims of the British government. I certainly don't, he replied. Non-interventionists have called for an exploration of the possibilities of a negotiated peace between the warring countries with the opposing sides, stating the terms they would accept. Kennedy asserted there was no possibility of negotiation at this time. What is Harry Hopkins' present mission in London, the witness was asked. Hopkins is one of the president's closest friends, lives with him at the White House, and is an unofficial advisor. I haven't the slightest idea, Kennedy replied. There were 242 air raids while he was in London, Kennedy testified, in addition to an impairment of industrial manufacturing, particularly as affecting night production. Lack of sleep cut down the efficiency of the people working by day, he testified. Is England rapidly going socialist? Kennedy was asked. It is a fact that Labour or the Socialist Party is becoming more effective, he answered. Would you be in favor of a limitation in this bill to prevent the president giving away the Navy? I can't for the life of me believe there is anybody in the United States who would give away the Navy, Kennedy replied and repeated, I just can't believe it. British opinion is divided, Kennedy said, on the psychological value of a declaration of war by the United States. Some think it might be of great benefit in Turkey and Spain. Others said it would be of immediate value, but that soon complaints would begin to arise about the lack of shipments of guns and tanks and planes. You can't beat the German army with psychology, he remarked. Some British leaders, said the ambassador, feel that they have not received the kind of help they expected from the United States. Kennedy carried no formal statement with him, but he spread out a copy of his radio speech of last Saturday night on the table before him and consulted it at intervals. In the speech, he declared that the United States can't stay out of war, and he reaffirmed that assertion with emphasis at frequent points in his testimony. He advocated a time limit on the pending legislation and said a money limitation would automatically follow. If we are prepared, I have no fear of an invasion by anybody, he said. The improbability of an invasion of America will be discussed by Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh when he appears before the committee later this week, it was made known by Representative Fish. Kennedy recommended, for the sake of efficiency, the creation of a very small committee in Congress which could function with the president. That would provide coordination, he said. No organization can function that is spread all over the lot. Washington, D.C., January 21st. The Roosevelt administration no sooner began its third term in office than the state governments today leveled sharp criticism at its policies on defense, relief, and taxation. After attending the inauguration ceremonies, the governors and other state officials convened today in the 5th General Assembly of the Council of State Governments. They heard the administration's plan for unprecedented powers for President Roosevelt announced. A New New Deal governor also joined in criticism of the administration's handling of the defense program. Governor Harold E. Stassen of Minnesota, president of the council, opened the sessions by suggesting the creation of a Supreme Defense Council consisting of the president and the majority and minority leaders of the Senate and House, to whom would be delegated the great powers and authority of the pending so-called Lend-Lease bill, which in its present form would give dictatorial powers to the president alone. These men, said Stassen, in supporting his plan, could rapidly and effectively decide any of the questions which would arise under the proposal, and in doing so, the responsibility of the legislative and the executive branches of the government would be maintained. Elwood J. Turner, a member of the Pennsylvania legislature and retiring chairman of the Board of Managers of the council, declared, "There are two grave problems which confront the people of America and upon which our destiny may depend. First, national defense, and second, the surrender of vast powers to the executive branch of the government, which in the name of national defense may destroy those liberties for the preservation of which national defense is being built. The surrender of these powers may not only curtail the freedom of action of our citizens, but the concentration and centralization of government in Washington may wipe out the vanishing state lines and take away the last vestige of local government." Governor Herbert H. Lehman of New York declared he was convinced the federal authorities must double their efforts in putting to use all facilities available for defense work. He said that there are many plants capable of turning out essential parts whose facilities are not being used. "It seems to me it is important that Washington should let the country know more specifically just what is needed for defense," said Lehman. Governor Herbert R. O'Connor of Maryland carried on the theme in addressing a dinner tonight, saying, "All emergencies increase and become more acute. The tendency toward more and more power also increases. I earnestly submit that both federal and state officials should constantly have in mind the preservation of our dual system of government and the respective rights of each." Attorney General Robert H. Jackson asserted tonight that defense production in some lines is suffering from a tendency to organize international cartels to keep production down and prices up. He specifically mentioned magnesium, a metal lighter than aluminum, to which ascribed the success of the German Stuka dive bombers. He said America had an unlimited supply of this metal, but German production outstripped this country's. Why, he asked. There is only one American producer, and that company operates under a license from a patent holding company, which is owned jointly by an American and a German company. They have refused to license any other firms but this one. And now for world news. Bucharest, Romania, January 22nd. Widespread disorders in Romania prompted General Ion Antonescu to put the army in charge of the state police, militarize 87 important industries, and make a desperate appeal last night to dissident Iron Guardists to forget the hatreds and aid him in reestablishing order. The orders included the slaying on Monday night of a German Major Doring, a staff officer of the German mission here. Dispatches from Belgrade, Yugoslavia, said the fighting was between heavily armed Romanian Iron Guardists, a pro-Nazi organization, and the Romanian army. From Sofia, Bulgaria, it was reported German troops now stationed in Romania in great numbers were speeding to Bucharest and other cities to quell the fighting. General Antonescu, Premier and Chief of State, dismissed Minister of Interior Petra Viscu, a leading Iron Guardist, for failure to set up a guard around the hotel housing the German military mission, failure to take the necessary steps after the murder of a German major, and for allowing internal disorder to collapse. Dumitru Popescu, military commander of Bucharest, was named new Minister of Interior. All police prefects were replaced by military men, and an army major was named head of military censorship, and an army general replaced the state police head. At 10 p.m., curfew was imposed. The disturbances taking place in Bucharest and other parts of the country were blamed by Antonescu on foreign agents, rebellious elements, and misunderstanding individuals. An official Romanian news agency dispatch published in Belgrade said Horia Sima, Iron Guard leader, had left Bucharest for Berlin to confer with Nazi leaders. A decree was published providing the death penalty for any premeditated crime against members of the German military mission. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, January 21st. 2 men were reported killed in rioting in front of the Bucharest police headquarters today when a group of Iron Guardists resisted an order placing police power throughout Romania in the hands of the military. This outbreak was said to have started after Iron Guardist police had defied orders from the new chief of all police, General Nicolescu Coxiul, for their ouster from the prefecture. The Gardists lowered an iron gate in an attempt to prevent entry of officers sent to disband them. The Gardists, or legionnaires, then took their stand in the courtyard and upon the roof of the building. Soldiers surrounded the headquarters and 500 Gardist sympathizers marched to the area. Then, according to reports here, 2 armored tanks arrived. The crowd advanced upon them with pickaxes and attempted to disable their caterpillar treads by throwing blankets torn from their horses into the mechanism. The tanks opened fire and killed 2 demonstrators. The Gardists withdrew with their dead. Romanian troops then occupied the police headquarters without further casualties, so far as is known. Demonstrations began in Romania last night after the German, Major Doring, had been shot fatally in a Bucharest street. The alleged assassin has been identified by Romanian authorities as a man named Sarandaz, 31 years old, a native of Turkey, but a naturalized Greek, who was said to have carried a checkbook of an American bank and letters from the United States and England when he was arrested. Police were reported searching for an accomplice. 10 prominent Greek residents of Bucharest were detained as hostages. 3 reasons were suggested in Sofia and at Belgrade and Bucharest as motivating the Romanian disorders. Number 1, bitter rivalry between extremists and more conservative elements in Romania's dominant Iron Guard. Number 2, increasing resentment in many quarters over German military concentrations in Romania and against the Antonescu regime. And number 3, an attempted coup by leftist followers of dethroned King Carol II or others trying to wrest power. Istanbul, Turkey, January 21st. The official Turkish radio announced tonight that the government has gathered a great part of its army in Thrace, European Turkey, where it awaits any possible action. Discussing the possibility of a German invasion across the Balkans, the radio said, "Those who attack our steel fortress of Thrace are doomed to fall in the attempt." Turkey fought on 8 fronts in the last war. No one should doubt her ability to fight on one front alone. Those who want to beat their heads on the rock may do so. The broadcaster expressed doubt, however, that the Nazis could mass enough troops in Romania to attempt the invasion, asserting they would meet a wide Balkan front. The Balkans can muster more than 100 divisions, and added to these would be British forces. It is doubtful, he added, that the Germans could pass peacefully through Bulgaria. Also, they would have to protect their left and right flanks. Struga, Yugoslavia, January 21st. Greek observers in this border town report that within the last week, the Italians have moved 18 fresh divisions of troops into Albania. Athens, Greece, January 21st. Italy's Crack Julia division has suffered such heavy losses in recent fighting on the Central Front that it has had to be withdrawn from the front for reorganization, a government spokesman said tonight. This Alpine division, which has taken part in all the major actions in the Pindus and Klissura sectors, had been particularly hard hit since mid-December. Hundreds of its soldiers have been taken prisoner. Scores of Greek soldiers are using equipment taken from these prisoners. Few officers are without one of the long iron-shod mountain picks the Alpini carry, and apparently the division was so battered materially and morally that it no longer was useful at the front. For the present, cold and snow in the north and rain on the coast are delaying operations, although Greek troops in the Central Front are pushing ahead slowly. In the Tepelini sector yesterday, local gains which will be important in future operations were made. More than 100 prisoners were taken. The most violent counterattack the Italians have made in the Tepelini-Clasura sector was repulsed yesterday. The Italian drive was intended, the Greeks said, to break up their advance toward Berat, oil-producing center, and the vital port of Valona. On the coast, the Greeks made advances preliminary to a possible general attack, and further east, the Greeks have gained a better position for attacks on the Tepelini-Valona road. Artillery has been increasingly active all along the front recently. The Greeks today are said to have silenced batteries which had been shelling Greek infantry divisions. In the north, where the weather makes large-scale operations impossible, the Greeks have been busy with patrols. A Greek government communique said the British Air Force blasted Valona Sunday night and Monday in the heaviest bombing attack so far carried out in that region. Rome, January 21st. The newspaper Il Giornale d'Italia today reported an air raid yesterday on the main Greek military base at Piraeus, the seaport of Athens, damaged and destroyed a large amount of merchant tonnage in the well-protected bay. Other Italian planes were said to have bombed military works at Rota on the Albanian coast north of Corfu and port works and barges loaded with war supplies in the harbor at Saranda. The Italians also reported their bombers had set fires at an aviation field on the Greek island of Crete. The British were reported to have lost one plane in a raid on the Italian-held port of Valona in Albania, which was said to have caused no damage. Berlin, January 21st. The British Mediterranean island naval base of Malta was bombed today, informed sources announced, with numerous well-aimed hits on militarily important facilities. Earlier, the High Command reported that scattered German combat planes attacked airports on Malta yesterday for the second successive day. The High Command's communique said 3 planes failed to return from operations Sunday night. Berlin, January 21st. The illustrious Britain's most powerful aircraft carrier is believed to have been sunk in Valletta, Malta's port, according to the latest reports of German and Italian reconnaissance flyers in the Mediterranean. An authoritative military source in Berlin today declared that after the second Stuka dive bomber attack on the Illustrious, the vessel assumed a heavy list, indicating that masses of water had penetrated the hull of the ship. The present position of the Illustrious, some 50 feet distant from the quay at Valletta, is so strange and unnatural that our airmen believe the vessel has been sunk, he said. The aircraft carrier has a draft of 8 meters, or about 25½ feet, while Valletta's harbor has a depth of only 11 meters, or 35 feet, the spokesman explained. Thus, he said, the German airmen are in a position to discern the hull in the shallow water as well as the superstructure. The Germans believe that a bomb exploding between the moored aircraft carrier and the quay on the port side proved fatal to the Illustrious. A heavy aerial bomb, the Germans said, has the effect of a torpedo piercing the ship's side when it explodes on the water close to the vessel. An authoritative military source asserted that since the start of the war, 16 British cruisers had been sunk by the Germans and Italians. At the outbreak of the war, England had 64 cruisers. Berlin, January 21st. 3 British merchantmen totaling 17,500 tons have been newly bombed, informed sources said today, and a 4th ship of 6,000 to 8,000 tons reported hit 2 days ago off Harwich, England, was declared to be sinking. London, January 21st. Lord Chatfield, Admiral of the Fleet, told Royal Empire Society today Britain is building more than 100 ships for naval and air force purposes, and said the sea situation is showing continual improvement. Construction of the new vessels, which will include 64 patrol ships and 26 minesweepers, shows Britain firmly believes that ship and not planes command the seas, Lord Chatfield said. If that had not been true, the Empire would have ceased to exist, and we would have been enslaved and His Majesty's dominions and colonies parceled out to other envious races, he declared. We need not be concerned by the recent air attack in the Mediterranean, he said. It was no more severe than the home fleet suffered in the North Sea years ago. If you fight hard, you must expect losses. We take confidence that if we lost a cruiser, meaning the Southampton, it was the first large ship sunk as a consequence of air attack in 18 months of war. The empire is a sound affair, and we need not fear it is going to perish from air attack. Declaring not one battleship has so far been sunk by enemy air action, Lord Chatfield said the battle fleet truly controls the seas and the war. It is the queen of the chessboard, the fullback of the British Navy. The Admiralty announced that the trawlers Manx Prince and Refundo had been sunk. There was no loss of life on the Manx Prince, it said. For the second successive week, the Admiralty announced a sharp decline in shipping losses. The figure for the week ending January 12th totaling 9 ships of 30,226 tons. In the 6 months since July, the average had been 85,000 tons a week. London, January 21st. The German Air Force switched back to widespread daylight assaults on England, today concentrating on London and the eastern part of the country. 3 alarms sounded here, and the government announced that bombs fell on the outskirts of the capital and in the surrounding counties, but that no important attack developed. A few casualties and some damage were acknowledged. Housewives were said to have hurried from their kitchens to smother firebombs dropped in a town on London's outskirts in a morning attack. Berlin, January 21st. A noontime raid on London today was reported by DNB, the official news agency, which told of 2 successive days of daylight thrusts against England. Compared with such activity, DNB said, not a single British plane had flown over Germany or German-occupied territory in the last 24 hours. Hong Kong, January 21st. Fresh fighting between Chinese and Japanese forces was reported today, particularly near the Yangtze River port of Yichang in Hubei province, where the Chinese said they had beaten the Japanese back with 1,900 casualties. Saigon, French Indochina, January 21st. In the developing war between Thailand and the French Far Eastern garrisons, a large force of Thai troops supported by mechanized units today reached the gates of Sam Rong, a city in northern Cambodia defended by a small body of French troops who, however, were backed by a bomber squadron. The French military communique described the Thai attack as violent. Thai forces also drove toward Cheom Chan in the northern part of French Cambodia, penetrating several miles within the border. A pitched battle was reported across the border, marking the Mekong River opposite Paxi. Both sides admitted sizable losses. Bangkok, Thailand, January 21st. The Thai High Command today reported heavy losses were inflicted on French Indo-Chinese forces which crossed the Mekong River, and 30 rivercraft were damaged in retaliatory raids by 5 Thai warplanes. Military objectives along much of the Indochina side of the border from Luang Prabang to the Gulf of Siam also were damaged by Thai raiders, the communique said. Hong Kong, January 21st. Chinese crewmen of the 1,185-ton Panama freighter Marian today reported their vessel was seized by a Japanese warship a week ago after it had unloaded a cargo at Suitung, Kwantung Province. The Marian was escorted to the vicinity of Swatow, where a few of the crew were landed, the Chinese said. When they reached here after a 175-mile overland hike, they said the Norwegian captain was kept on the vessel. The Japanese also were reported to have seized the Portuguese ship Anju. Lloyd's Shipping Guide lists 2 ships named Anju, but neither is of Portuguese registry. Shanghai, China, January 21st. The liner President Taft will sail for the United States tomorrow with 165 passengers, most of them Americans, leaving the Orient in response to the American State Department's advice. San Francisco, California, January 21st. Globe Wireless reported tonight the steamship Aquarius was preparing to take in tow the storm-crippled Greek freighter Agia Thalassini, which called for help northwest of Guam yesterday. London, January 21st. Robert Boothby, parliamentary secretary to the Food Ministry, resigned tonight after a parliamentary committee charged him with conduct contrary to usage and derogatory to the dignity of the House. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, whom Boothby once served as secretary, accepted his resignation. Boothby, however, did not give up his membership in Parliament. Specifically, the committee declared that Boothby, who became chairman of a committee of Czech claimants after Germany occupied Prague, had a claim to participation to the extent of £24,200, or about $96,800, in the realization of Czech assets. The report said Boothby had received a promise a sum of money would be given him if he would assist in getting funds belonging to Richard Weiniger, a Czech subject and international financier, released in Prague. London, January 21st. Drastic disciplinary action was demanded in the House of Commons today against Lieutenant Colonel R.C. Bingham, who charged in a letter to the London Times that the working class men now serving as army officers had largely fallen down on the job. Never was an old school tie, college insignia, meaning college insignia, and the best it stands for more justified than today, Bingham said in his letter. During the Commons discussion of the letter, Lady Astor asserted, "A great many ordinary soldiers think there is a good deal of substance in this matter, and everybody knows it." Captain H.D.F. Margeson, Secretary of State for War, told Commons that Bingham had been directed to give an explanation. Laborite Malcolm McMillan demanded drastic disciplinary action, asserting that regulations forbid officers and soldiers from writing to the press. When Margeson asked for action to make sure more discretion is exercised, the House echoed with a chorus of assent in which Prime Minister Churchill joined. Rome, January 21st. Renato Ricci, recently named Italy's industrial dictator, and his chief assistant Tullio Cianetti have left their jobs for frontline fighting posts, the official news agency Stefani said tonight. The agency failed to say where they are to be sent or who is running the vast production machine entrusted to Ricci only December 31st, when Premier Mussolini gave him control over industry in addition to his cabinet post as Minister of Guilds. Ricci is a lieutenant colonel in the Bersaglieri, Cianetti a captain of artillery. Washington, D.C., January 21st. The Roosevelt administration announced tonight that it has removed the moral embargo on shipments of airplanes and other aeronautical equipment and materials to Russia. The embargo was imposed by President Roosevelt in December 1939 because of Russia's unprovoked bombing of civilians in Finland. The lifting of the embargo was interpreted in the Capitol tonight as an attempt to woo the Soviet Union away from the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. The State Department tonight released the following note from Undersecretary of State Sumner Welles to Soviet Ambassador Konstantin Umansky. Following our recent conversation, I am happy to inform you that the government of the United States of America has decided that the policy set forth in the statement issued to the press by the President on December 2nd, 1939, and generally referred to as the moral embargo, are no longer applicable to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This decision is being communicated to interested American manufacturers and exporters. The State Department recalled that in a statement issued to the press by the President on December 2nd, 1939, the hope was expressed that American manufacturers and exporters of airplanes, aeronautical equipment, and materials essential to airplane manufacture would bear in mind before negotiating contracts for the export of these articles that the American government and the American people had for some time pursued the policy of wholeheartedly condemning the unprovoked bombing and machine gunning of civilian populations from the air. This so-called moral embargo was without force in law, but was indirectly enforceable through the export license system. Inasmuch as most of the banned items were already subject to this license system or were subsequently added, the government could deny licenses to exporters who refused to abide by the requested prohibition. Under the action today, the export license system will not be invoked against these items. From time to time since the original announcement of the ban, the President and the State Department have clarified their position in the matter and added items to the list of materials and equipment Americans were advised not to send to Russia. On December 15, 1939, the State Department issued to the press a statement that molybdenum and aluminum were included among materials essential to airplane manufacture, which the president had asked be withheld from export to the Soviets. Gasoline was added 5 days later. The State Department announced an extension of government policy to include the advice that, for the time being, there be no further delivery to certain countries of any plants, manufacturing rights, or technical information required for the production of high-quality aviation gasoline. The export license system has covered arms, ammunition, and implements of war since November 29, 1935. On May 1, 1937, the president defined that class of products as including aircraft of all types, aircraft armament, and all major aircraft parts. Last July 2nd, the president added to this license system list the following items: aluminum, molybdenum, and aircraft parts other than those named in his previous proclamation. A further addition to the license system list was made by the president last September 12th. London, January 21st. The American government's reported offer to grant facilities to Britain for certain branches of training on American flying grounds probably will be accepted by the British government, according to the London Daily Telegraph, because of the rapid expansion of the Empire Air Training Scheme. The reported offer, it is said, was not accepted at first because sufficient facilities were available in Canada. However, a Canadian mission now in Britain is understood to favor the plan, and it is expected the British government will sanction an extension of Royal Air Force training to the United States. Washington, D.C., January 21st. The State, War, and Navy Department officials tonight disclaimed any knowledge of an American offer to train British pilots on American flying fields. Hong Kong, January 21st. Irishmen here today cabled an appeal to Prime Minister Eamon de Valera urging Ireland's support of the British war effort and abandonment of its neutrality. Irishmen in Hong Kong joined their compatriots in North America and Malaya to strongly urge the fullest support and cooperation with the British Commonwealth of Nations, war against dictatorships, and the immediate abandonment of the present policy of neutrality, the message said. London, January 21st. An authoritative British source said British residents in Japan were advised last November to leave unless they had important reasons for staying, and that this advice still stands. This informant said nothing was known here of a notice reported to have been issued today by the active British Consul General in Yokohama advising certain Britons to leave Japan before the impending crisis in American-Japanese relations comes to a head. He added that this notice was not issued on instructions from the British Foreign Office. Washington, D.C., January 21st. Viscount Halifax is due to arrive in New York by Clipper plane on Thursday to take up his duties as British ambassador here, it was disclosed in official circles tonight. Several aides are accompanying him on the flight. London, January 21st. Prime Minister Winston Churchill refused once more today to give questioners in the House of Commons an outline of Britain's war aims and plans for peace to follow the conflict. Most right-minded people here and abroad, and especially in the United States, already fully understand the cause and principles which we are waging war on Nazi tyranny, Churchill told the House. Ottawa, Ontario, January 21st. The Canadian Film Board said today that British ships have seized substantial quantities of German-made motion pictures intended for use as propaganda in the United States and South America. The British Contraband Control has seized many official German films and sent them here. John Grierson, Dominion Film Commissioner, is editing them into what officials described as a valuable pictorial record of the war. Some of the films have been incorporated into Canadian motion pictures. Others are released to the United States after editing for counter-propaganda purposes. Montreal, Quebec, January 21st. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia of New York, American co-chairman, reported satisfactory progress today at the conclusion of a 2-day meeting of the United States-Canada Joint Permanent Defense Board. LaGuardia announced the board would meet in the United States late in February. Referring to the meetings here, he said, "Our work is highly technical and extremely confidential. There's not much we can say except that there was satisfactory progress." Vichy, France, January 21st. Information from Paris indicated tonight that Adolf Hitler's reply to France's chief of state, Marshal Henri Philippe Pétain, is ready and soon will be delivered by Fernand de Brennan, French representative in Paris. It was not possible, however, to obtain immediate confirmation here. Marshal Pétain sent Hitler a letter on Christmas Eve outlining how German-French collaboration could continue. According to the Paris Information, Hitler's reply takes the stand that charges against Pierre Laval were proved baseless when it was officially announced that Laval and Pétain had effected a reconciliation. Laval, vice premier and foreign minister, was ousted from the cabinet on December 13th. It has been reported in Bern, Switzerland, that Laval was accused of personal ambitions even to the length of setting up his own French government. Hitler's reply also was reported to insist that Laval be included in Vichy's inner councils, for example, in a rumored sub-cabinet, and that such incidents as caused the Laval's resignation must not be repeated if the Vichy government wants French-German collaboration to continue. Franco-German negotiations were halted when Laval resigned. Pétain, a high government source, said yesterday will keep his present cabinet until he hears from Hitler. Official circles said the Vichy government's position that the French fleet will not be used against Britain stands unaltered. Admiral William D. Leahy, United States ambassador, made a courtesy call today on Admiral Jean Darlan, French Navy Secretary. The Vichy government has protested to Britain against the seizure of the French freighter Mendoza off the coast of Brazil, an official announcement said. It added that France called the attention of the Brazilian government to the conditions in which the incident occurred. Washington, D.C., this January 21st. President Roosevelt today said he supposed 50 executive orders of all kinds had been drawn up to meet contingencies and that perhaps one of them provided for the freezing of assets of all European countries and the United States. The freezing of such assets, he said, is one of many things that has been studied for a long time and remains under study. At the first press conference of his third term, the president was asked whether an executive order for that purpose actually had been prepared. He said he supposed one might have been printed, but that fact did not necessarily mean much. The orders were drafted as a precautionary measure, he indicated, so they would be ready in case they were needed suddenly. On the question of transferring American war vessels to the British, the president repeated what he said at a recent press conference, that he did not want to stand on his head and that he did not think it necessary to put a prohibition against that in the Lend-Lease bill. The president was asked what he thought about the suggestion by Governor Harold Stassen of Minnesota that the powers proposed for the president by the Lend-Lease legislation should instead be given jointly to a congressional committee and the chief executive. Mr. Roosevelt responded by asking whether the questioner had read the Constitution. "Is that joint delegation of power prohibited?" he was asked. "Sure," Mr. Roosevelt responded. He asserted in reply to another question, however, that he supposed he did not have the power, if he wanted to exercise it, to authorize the escorting of cargo convoys by American vessels. Rome, January 21st. Adolf Hitler's secret meeting with Benito Mussolini was described by a fascist press organ today as a solemn warning to the United States. Virginio Gaeta, fascism's editorial spokesman, declared that the sharpening of warlike trends across the ocean figured much in the Hitler-Mussolini meeting. These trends, he said, do not pass without reactions. The official Rome radio asserted that President Roosevelt was preparing to enter the war, but that the American public would have none of it. After saying that the Hitler-Mussolini discussion over the weekend was a solemn warning to the United States, the newspaper La Tribuna announced those who, for business reasons, ideological stubbornness, or low calculations inspired by the destructive intentions of international masonry and jewelry, Jewry, Jewry, still believe they can interpose obstacles to the advance of the new order and prop up the the iniquitous British hegemony. Moscow, January 21st. Russia's newspapers made the 17th anniversary of the death of Nikolai Lenin an occasion for proclaiming anew today the Soviet Union's policy of neutrality and increase of internal power. TASS, official Russian news agency, said renewal for another year of an agreement permitting Japanese fishing in Russian waters doubtlessly constitutes a step forward in the matter of improvement of Soviet-Japanese relations. The renewed agreement signed last night requires a 20% increase in rentals and taxes payable by Japanese fishery owners, TASS said. Moscow, January 21st. The arrival of a Swiss trade delegation was announced here today, marking the first formal contact between Switzerland and Russia in more than 20 years. The Swiss apparently were following the precedent set by Yugoslavia, which negotiated a commercial agreement in Moscow last year as a prelude to reorganizing the Soviet regime and establishing diplomatic relations. Switzerland recognized the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1918, but relations were broken off after Václav Vorovsky, Soviet delegate to the Lausanne Conference of 1923, was slain by a political assassin. Dublin, Ireland, January 21st. 4 British military prisoners who escaped from an internment camp last night were recaptured today. 8 British airmen now detained came down in different parts of the country in the last few months, mainly because of motor difficulties. One of the prisoners, an Oxford philosophy student, has been permitted to pursue his studies at Trinity College. About a dozen German airmen have also been interned. John Steele, former London correspondent of the Chicago Tribune, in a letter to an old friend, told of living conditions in the London area. He said, "We hear a lot of noise at night, mostly from the anti-aircraft guns, and occasionally we hear a bomb dropping in the distance, but there has been nothing very near us. The nearest, I think, was about a half-mile away. We get what we want, perhaps not just what we want at the time. I mean, like having to take mutton someday when your appetite is fixed on beef, but there is plenty of it. We sleep in our beds every night. Except to look at one, I have not seen the inside of an air raid shelter, and I believe neither have 80% of the inhabitants of London. It is pretty awful, of course, but there has been a lot of hysterical reporting about it. The casualties so far are just about the same as those due to road accidents in normal times, and the road casualties are fewer now than in normal times. The fact is, the airplane is a very hit-or-miss sort of weapon, and it misses far oftener than it hits, even in the hands of really skilled pilots, which most of the Germans seem not to be." London, January 22nd. The government last night suppressed the Daily Worker, organ of the Communist Party in Britain, and the Week, a weekly newsletter of leftist tendencies. They have been describing the war as a battle between two imperialisms and have constantly advised workers the ruling classes were using the war as an excuse for enslaving labor. By order of Home Secretary Herbert Morrison, Scotland Yard detectives raided the offices of the Daily Worker and stopped publication as the paper was going to press. The equipment, which was also used by the Week, was impounded until a court can pass on the issue. The Week was published by Claude Cockburn, a leftist. London, January 21st. Britain has decided to register her working men and women as a potential permanent mobile labor force, which soon may be drafted into war factories, Labour Minister Ernest Bevin told the House of Commons today. Bevin announced plans for a census by age groups of those who should be called upon to serve the state behind the lines. Most people will volunteer, he declared, but he warned there will be no exception of rank or anything else. With the announcement, the Labour minister disclosed several other drastic changes in the lives of Britons at war. Employers no longer will be allowed to discharge men except for misconduct in vital industries. Workers in those industries will be forbidden to leave their jobs without the government's permission. Draft ages for the Army shortly are to be broadened, lowered from 20 years to 19, and raised 1 or more years above the present top limit of 36. Authority to draft men and women from other occupations or from unemployment into war industries was given by Parliament in the Emergency Powers Act of last May 22nd. The act also gave the government power to draft capital, but Bevin did not mention this in his announcement. Capital already is paying a 42.5% profits tax and a 100% excess profits tax. Bevin stressed the forthcoming role of women in munitions work and for civil defense. Many women who in normal circumstances would not take employment will be called into munitions and aircraft factories, he said, and as more men are called up for the forces, industry will have to absorb women far more than it is doing. London, January 21st. David Lloyd George, World War Prime Minister, and his two sons arrived tonight at Cricieth, Wales, home where Mrs. Lloyd George died yesterday. The former premier traveled by automobile and train from Churt, his country home in Surrey, and was delayed by road mishaps and by doctor's orders not to overtax his strength. London, January 21st. Lord Woolton, Food Minister, today advised Britons they must expect a decline in offerings of meat from the home markets as a result of weather conditions, which also cause transportation difficulties. He said those unable to obtain their full fresh meat ration, about 25 cents a person weekly, would be allowed to make up the amount in corned beef. London, January 21st. More than 1 million mechanics and shipbuilders will receive an increase of 3 shillings 6 pence a week, or about 69 and 1/2 cents. A national arbitration tribunal decided tonight after considering demands for more pay. The decision, which is binding on the workers without appeal, represents a compromise. The workers had asked between 10 and 12 shillings, or about $2 to $2.40, increase a week extra. Paris, January 14th, via Berlin delayed. Hungry Parisians saw hope of an increased supply of food today following an announcement that taxes on merchandise entering the metropolis were practically abolished in an effort to relieve distress. The entry taxes amounting to interior customs duties have made Parisians aware more than any other measure that they are living in a really revolutionary epoch. The taxes, called octroi, had aroused the indignation of Parisians as an outmoded medieval custom reminiscent of the times when every city and province in France levied its own customs duties. Despite the loud protests, the taxes had survived largely because they furnished convenient jobs to the numerous claimants to a little slice of the public budget. The present measure, which went into effect at midnight Monday, January 13th, does not abolish the octroi completely, but reduces it to a shadow. Butchered meat, for instance, paid an entry duty equivalent to 90 cents to $2.40 per 220 pounds. Now, this has been reduced to a uniform duty, regardless of the quality of the meat, to about 20 cents. In like proportion, the taxes are reduced on such fowl as chickens, turkeys, guinea hens, and pigeons. The butter tax is reduced by half. The object of the knockout blow dealt at the medieval custom of the octroi is to induce the peasants to supply the Paris markets. With prices fixed inside the city, it was impossible to pass the entry taxes onto the consumer. The peasant, therefore, had to pay it and replied by refusing to sell farm products. Without the taxes, it is calculated that Paris will get some relief from the blockade conditions under which it has been living for more than 6 months. Parisians, meanwhile, are suffering from a coal famine. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, January 21st. Authoritative Brazilian sources today confirmed reports that negotiations were underway between Admiral Georges Robert, High Commissioner of Martinique, and officials of Brazil and Argentina for the purchase of frozen and canned meat and flour for the French possessions of Martinique and Guadeloupe. Such commodities previously had been imported from the United States, but transportation difficulties and trade problems have virtually cut off that source. The French islands, it was said, are on the verge of a famine for the second time since the Franco-German armistice was signed. Brazil is willing to ship meat and manioc meal in Brazilian ships provided COD arrangements can be made, it was reported. However, Brazil is unable to supply white flour since its own demands must be filled in the United States or Argentina. Vichy, France, January 21st. After a voyage of nearly 3 months in which they said they were seized 3 times by British vessels, 300 demobilized French sailors and officers reached home today from the West Indies. Berlin, January 21st. Berlin newspapers paid scant attention today to President Roosevelt's inauguration. Yesterday, only those having special correspondence in Washington, D.C. printing brief items. There was no editorial comment and no official reaction was forthcoming immediately. Tokyo, January 21st. Japanese women, if they would be beautiful, should eat heartily, be fat and healthy, and sleep well without dreaming. It was decided today at a meeting sponsored by the Imperial Rule Assistance Association. Other points on female beauty were: no makeup, for beauty must be natural. Be bright and gay. Be proud of your sunburn. Have a straight figure. Also have big hips. Walk straight. Be able to work hard without fatigue and talk graciously. London, January 21st. 4 persons were killed in an explosion in a Scottish arms factory this afternoon, the Ministry of Supply announced. An immediate inquiry is being held, the announcement said, adding material damage was slight. And now back to national news. Washington, D.C., January 21st. Members of the House of Representatives today expressed strong opposition to any move on the part of the administration to transfer United States warships to the British Navy. The matter was brought up during the debate in the House, which preceded the passage of a bill authorizing the Navy to spend $300 million for modernization of fleet aircraft defenses. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson told the House Foreign Affairs Committee last week that he could foresee conditions under which it might be deemed advisable to bolster Great Britain's blockade of Nazi Germany at the expense of this country's Navy. His was the first admission by an administration leader that such power would be vested in President Roosevelt through the war dictatorship measure shortly to come before the House. Representative Hamilton Fish, Republican New York, opened debate on the $300 million naval spending bill today by urging that all bills pertaining to the Navy include specific provisions to prohibit the chief executive from giving away any part of the Navy without consent of Congress. No man, regardless of how good, bad, or indifferent he is as the chief executive of the United States, should have such power to give away part of our Navy, Fish asserted. Representative Earl C. Michener, Republican Michigan, indicated bluntly that the real fight to resist any delegation of power for the transfer of the Navy to a foreign government will be made when the dictatorship bill reaches the floor. Meanwhile, he suggested the naval bill is in the category of a defense measure and should proceed to passage without delay. Let's wait and see what that Lend-Lease bill says when it gets here, Michener said significantly. We'll be ready to cross that bridge when we get to it. Evidently, following Michener's lead in the matter of postponing debate on the subject of transferring part of the battle fleet to Great Britain, the House rejected the Fish proposal by a standing vote. The bill received unanimous approval soon afterward and now goes to the Senate. It is the initial step in a $1,209 million emergency authorization program to speed up shipbuilding, add 400 auxiliary craft to the American fleet, and arm warships against air attack. The money in today's measure will be used for increased armor and anti-aircraft batteries on 60 battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers. New York, January 21st. The northeastern United States had a slight taste of modern aerial war conditions today as the Air Defense Command began a 4-day test of air raid warning facilities. Army pursuit ships sped aloft from 5 flying fields to intercept invading, quote, enemy, unquote, bombers. Summarizing the day's activities, Major General James E. Cheney, commanding general of the ADC, described them as highly successful. Every enemy bomber was picked up by the ground network of more than 10,000 volunteer civilian observers at 700 posts throughout the area, he said. Some interceptions by pursuit ships, Curtiss P-40s, the Army's latest type of fighter, did not work out, General Cheney said, adding that we did not expect them to initially. It takes time and experience, he added. General Cheney praised the cooperation of civilian observers who began their chilly vigils at dawn and continued them throughout the day in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and the New York City area. Their work in quickly reporting the type, altitude, and direction of the bombers to nerve centers in Boston and New York enabled Army men to know where enemy formations were at all times. With day maneuvers complete, the ADC made ready for night exercises in which the test took on a more realistic atmosphere. Around the Navy Yards in Brooklyn and Newport, Rhode Island, the command threw rings of giant searchlights of 800 million candle power poking fingers of light up to 15,000 feet. A plane was considered hit if caught in a light beam. As in the day, the defenders did not know when or whence the flights would come. A bomber was to be considered intercepted if caught in one of the huge beams. Atop hills and from the roofs of buildings and other vantage points, spotters stared into the night sky, ready to report any plane's presence. Their experts waited to plot any bomber's course on huge maps to flash orders to one of the flying fields, Mitchell and Suffolk on Long Island, and at Groton, Connecticut, Hillsborough, Rhode Island, and Boston, where pursuit ships were tuned to go aloft. In the New York area, the fastest interception of the day occurred this morning when planes leaving Mitchell Field met a bomber 4 minutes after it was first seen over Oyster Bay, Long Island. The pursuit ships took off a minute after the bomber was seen. Army Air Corps defenders claimed 10 theoretical attacks were beaten off in New England, with 6 groups of bombers described as destroyed and 4 others chased off to sea. New York, January 21st. How do the Bermudians like the idea of the Americans taking over a sizable chunk of their balmy island kingdom for a huge hemispheric defense base? The answer is that the native residents of the Isles are not particularly overjoyed by the prospect, although local merchants are warming up to it somewhat in the hope of better business. The latter feeling grows as the war continues and scares the tourists away. A Bermudian smile is for the American tourist, but his heart is with the British Empire. So Bermuda is carrying on, facing the ordeal of playing host to Uncle Sam as a sacrifice of war and aid to Britain. That was the sentiment this correspondent found on a recent visit to the colony. There will be 6,000 American soldiers, sailors, Marines, and their families settling down in this tiny subtropical paradise of only 19 square miles. That represents a population increase of nearly 20%. And as was pointed out in the colonial legislature, the 99-year lease involved in the destroyers for bases deal means virtual perpetuity. One prominent resort businessman in Bermuda recalled the brawling between American and British sailors in the colony during the World War and, dismally shaking his head, remarked the old axiom that 2 families could not live happily under one roof might apply in the new situation. So far, there has been no scrapping, for which thanks should go to Captain Frank Akers of the USS George E. Badger, the destroyer sent to Bermuda last fall after the base deal was put over, and Lieutenant Commander T.R. Frederick, commanding the 3 American naval bombing planes on patrol at Bermuda. They have been giving their men continuous talks against fighting with British over who won the last war. Washington, D.C., January 21st. Hymn books costing $30 apiece are among some of the shocking purchases being made by the Army in the Defense Spending Program. Representative Eugene E. Cox, Democrat, Georgia, charged today before the House Rules Committee. And I understand they've ordered enough organs to keep the factories running at capacity, he asserted. What does a soldier want with such a musical instrument? The congressman also declared the Army has added to its stock of defense articles some $5,500,000 worth of mosquito nesting, enough for everyone in the world. Spokesman for the Army indignantly denied Cox's charges concerning the $30 hymnals, but admitted organs are being bought for the use of Army chaplains. They said the Army has contracted for only $3,200,000 worth of mosquito netting, a total of 8,200,000 yards. They conceded this is more than the Army has ever used before, but asserted it is necessary because of the enlarged defense program. Dayton, Ohio, January 21st. A huge 4-motored Army bomber took off from Patterson Field tonight at 5 p.m. Chicago time on an 18-hour endurance flight that will take it over Boston, New York City, and southward possibly as far as Jacksonville, Florida. Major James E. Parker, in charge of accelerated flight operations at nearby Wright Field Army Testing Laboratory, said approximately 3,000 miles should be covered. The plane, in command of Captain J.M. Wallace, is expected to cruise at 15,000 feet, nearly 3 miles. The flight is similar to one made 3 weeks ago by a bomber which flew across the southwest and returned. Bad weather conditions forced it to fly at a lower level. Wallace is accompanied by 4 officers and 2 enlisted men. Fort Benning, Georgia, January 21st. Ripcord paralysis, a form of fear likely to make a parachute leap the jumpers last, doesn't worry members of the 501st Parachute Battalion in training at this Army post. With 412 enlisted men and 34 officers undergoing arduous training required of parachute troops, the Army has made sure that the man who leaps in training will not need someone else to pick him up. By light lines attached to the plane and to the ripcord of the parachute, each jumper, the parachute is opened automatically when the jumper is about 15 feet from the plane. The line snaps and the parachute billows out. Not content with merely training infantrymen for dropping on hostile territory, the Army is utilizing colored parachutes for dropping machine guns and similar equipment right behind them. Each man, on reaching the ground and freeing himself of his chute, looks into the sky for a parachute of predetermined color. He spots its probable landing place and hastens there. By coloring the equipment chutes, the men do not waste time running about in search of weapons. Mobile, Alabama, January 21st. Work at the Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company's yards, a Navy destroyer repair base, was halted for several hours today, affecting 3,400 employees. The controversy was reported to involve wage increases of 8 cents an hour, seniority, and apprentice systems. Work was resumed this afternoon, but J.W. Atkins, regional director of the CIO Marine and Shipbuilding Workers, said the men would quit for an indefinite period each day for the next 2 weeks unless the company meets the union's demands. The yards are repairing and rebuilding vessels for the Navy, repairing laid-up fleet ships sold to the British lines, and building and repairing ships for private lines. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, January 21st. The Navy Yard announced today that the keel will be laid Saturday afternoon for the battleship Wisconsin. The announcement said the public will not be admitted. New York, January 21st. Milo J. Warner, National Commander of the American Legion, today said Major General Frank Parker, retired of Washington, and Franklin D. Ollier of Morristown, New Jersey, former Legion commander, would accompany him to London for a study of civilian defense methods. Under tentative plans, they will leave sometime before February by Clipper for Lisbon. A Legion spokesman said the mission was approved by 50 of 51 Legion officials, including the executive committee, who were polled. Panama City, Panama, January 21st. A report that a sergeant at Fort Amador is under arrest on a charge of having tried to sell secrets about canal defenses to an unidentified person was published tonight in the Panama American. 2 privates, it added, are under suspicion. Military headquarters would not comment. Fort Amador is a Coast Artillery defense station at the Pacific entrance of the canal. New York, January 21st. Wendell L. Willkie, on the eve of his departure for London, received today from Prime Minister Winston Churchill a cablegram of welcome and an invitation to call on his arrival. Still slightly ill from smallpox and typhoid inoculations, Willkie wirelessed Churchill that he would communicate with him as soon as he arrived. He will take to Churchill a personal letter from President Roosevelt. Willkie will leave for Lisbon aboard the Yankee Clipper tomorrow with 2 friends, John Cowles, publisher of the Minneapolis Star-Journal, and Landon K. Thorne, New York banker. He is scheduled to arrive in London Friday on a British plane from Lisbon. Willkie insisted he intended to listen, not talk, in England. Washington, D.C., January 21st. President Roosevelt today said he thought he would talk to someone tomorrow about the appointment of a new ambassador to England, but laughed loudly when asked if John G. Winant would get the post. Authoritative informants had reported that Winant, former governor of New Hampshire and first chairman of the Social Security Board, probably would be named to succeed Joseph P. Kennedy, retiring ambassador. Mr. Roosevelt said he had not yet spoken to anybody about the designation of a new envoy. Stephen Early, White House press secretary, remarked that Winant had called the White House a few minutes earlier to ask whether news stories that he would be named were true. Capitol Hill sources reported that Anthony J. Drexel Biddle Jr. of Philadelphia may go to London soon as ambassador to 4 countries whose governments are in exile. They are Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway. Biddle is ambassador to the Polish government in exile. He has been in this country for several months. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, January 21st. John C. Cudahy, former ambassador to Belgium, expressed the opinion today that Germany would find it impossible to invade England and that the European war would be brought to a military decision before the end of next summer. I had the same feeling about another phase of the war last spring, he said. I was certain then that the Germans were to move to a major action in the Low Countries, and they did. Cudahy added quickly, beware of predictions in Europe, remarking that whereas statesmen once looked forward to 5 and 10 years, they now forecast in terms of a year. Boston, Massachusetts, January 21st. Strangled by a cord around his neck, Robert Emery, 26 years old, a married South Natick real estate dealer, was found today in an apartment here. Shortly afterward, police announced a woman found with him admitted garroting him after administering an overdose of sleeping tablets. Police Captain John F. McCarthy described the case as homicide and attempted suicide. Emery was the father of 2 children. McCarthy said Mrs. Ruth Stedman, 26, estranged wife of a Pittsburgh insurance man, told him, I was in love with Emery. I couldn't have him and I couldn't do without him, so I decided to kill him and do away with myself. Mrs. Stedman, who said she also had taken the sleeping potion, was placed under police guard in the city hospital. The police captain said the slaying occurred in Mrs. Stedman's apartment, which she leased after separating from her husband last July and coming to Boston to take a position at Harvard Business School. New York, January 21st. William B. Smith, actor's agent, said tonight his 2-month-old marriage with Ethel Merman, Broadway star, was all washed up. I just can't take the nightclubs, Smith said. I'm going home to Hollywood and I'll have it fixed up in Reno. Asked what the cause of action would be, Smith told newsmen, I don't know. I saw Ethel today and she doesn't want to give me a divorce. And now for local and regional news. Labor support of the America First Committee is growing by leaps and bounds. It was reported yesterday by James Jenkins, head of the Labor Division of the Chicago chapter. This additional force of public opinion is being brought to bear against the war dictatorship bill, H.R. 1776. Labor is becoming acquainted with the fact that the America First Committee is trying to do everything possible to keep America out of the European war, said Jenkins, a member of the Bridge and Structural Iron Workers Union, Local Number 1 of Chicago. A sponsoring labor committee now includes the following: Leslie G. Gowdy, president of the Teamsters District Council Number 25, Clayton E. Pence, financial secretary of the Web Pressmen's Union, Local Number 7, Robert L. Gordon, business representative of the Building Trades Council of Champaign, Herbert C. Wagner, business representative of the Iron Workers and Steamfitters Local at Rockford, George V. Shinsky, a business agent of the Hod Carriers and Common Laborers Union, Local 184 at LaSalle, and Kenneth Donaldson, recording secretary of Local 1 of the Progressive Mine Workers of America at Gillespie. Among additional unions endorsing the America First movement were the Track Layers Construction and Repairmen's Union, Local 1009, and the Clement Finishers Union, Local 502, Jenkins said. Individual statements opposing the war dictatorship bill were signed by 327 employees of the Western Shade Cloth Company at Jefferson Avenue and Cermak Road, Jenkins said. Mark Enfield, labor leader of Pontiac and one of the downstate directors of the A1 committee, reported to Jenkins that much progress has been made outside of Cook County and that it will crystallize as regular union meetings are held. Columbus Healy, chairman of the Aurora chapter of the America First Committee, said today that 61 persons joined the organization following the Saturday radio address of former Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy. Springfield, Illinois, January 21st. Governor Dwight H. Green plans to start working on a regular schedule of fixed office hours next week. According to tentative plans, there will be a weekly meeting of his cabinet with which no other business will be permitted to interfere. That may come each Monday morning. On legislative days, there will be a definite period for receiving state senators and representatives. An extremely brief experience with the pressure upon the chief executive's office is said to have been sufficient to convince the new governor and his staff of the necessity of a time schedule. The 8 department heads he has named assumed their duties yesterday, and apparently all of them had matters to take up with him. Most of the announcements in their behalf were issued through the governor's office, but the facts about several resignations became public through other channels. This morning, the governor gave newspapermen a statement summarizing the dismissal of employees from unnecessary positions so far as they have been recorded to date. The dismissals totaled 411. The payroll cut made by Finance Director George B. McKibben totaled 84 employees here and 78 in the Chicago offices. Conservation Director Livingston E. Osborne's dismissals were totaled at 103, while 34 were fired by the Department of Agriculture, 8 by the Insurance Bureau, and 24 by the Department of Registration. Director of Public Welfare Rodney H. Brandon will drop 83 employees on January 31st. 5 managing officers of institutions resigned because they have been called into Army service. Mrs. Blanche Fritz of Bridgeport, Assistant Director, and Alfred O'Brien of Galesburg, a Stell appointee as Superintendent of Prisons, also quit. Washington, D.C., January 21st. Senator Waylon Brooks, the new Republican senator from Illinois, received outstanding Senate committee assignments today when the Senate ratified appointments to vacancies by the Republican Committee on Committees. He was placed on 2 of the most important committees, Appropriations and Interstate Commerce. Thus, Illinois regains a voice it has not had for years in the framing of appropriations for the conduct of the government and of legislation affecting railroads and other transportation agencies, telegraph and telephone systems, and radio. Other committees to which Mr. Brooks was assigned are pensions, claims, and interoceanic canals. Senator Arthur H. Vandenberg, Republican Michigan, was assigned to the Committee on Interoceanic Canals. Senator Raymond E. Willis, Republican Indiana, was assigned to the Committees on Library, Agriculture, Post Offices, Public Lands, and Printing. Senator Frederick Van Nuys, Democrat Indiana, was made chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Former Judge Virgil E. Whitaker of Hammond last night telegraphed the presiding officers of the Indiana legislature asking why they have not appointed a committee to conduct and decide a contest of the election of Governor Henry F. Schricker, a Democrat. Whitaker, who was defeated as the Republican candidate for the state's attorney in Lake County, filed the contest petition a week ago. It charges that the votes of aliens defeated Glenn R. Hillis, the Republican nominee for governor, in the November 5th election. Under the law, the joint committee of 7 members from each house should have been selected by voice vote immediately after my petition was filed, Whitaker said. It hasn't been done. Why? If they wait 1 week, they can wait another 7 weeks, and the 61-day session will be over. Then it will be too late to remedy the injustice done to Mr. Hillis. Time is the essence of this matter. Whitaker said he had heard that Democrats have threatened to block the entire legislative program of the Republicans if the contest is pressed. The Republicans do not have quite enough members to make up the 2/3 necessary for a quorum. The leading piece of legislation in performance of a GOP campaign pledge is a Ripper bill, which would undo the 1933 Reorganization Act that placed most of the power and patronage in the governor's hands. It was learned last night that the stacks of records of Whitaker's inquiry into the alien status of Lake County voters have been moved into Illinois. This was done after Whitaker was informed that the Democrats might attempt to seize the evidence through a court order. The investigation needs to be continued to amass additional evidence similar to that found thus far, Whitaker said. If the Republican State Central Committee, which yesterday approved the basis for a contest, will assist financially, the investigation can go on. The committee has $30,000 remaining from the campaign. On Monday, the state GOP group unanimously adopted a report of a subcommittee recommending that the legislature follow through on the test. William E. Jenner, President pro tem of the Senate, said last night that Speaker James M. Knapp of the House has been waiting for legal advice before acting on the petition. There is no purposeful delay, said Jenner. Republican legislatures are really interested, and if the alien situation is true, it should nullify the election of Governor Schricker. Under the law, the legislators have to act, and from what I saw of them in caucus last night, they want to act. Jenner said there is some doubt among lawyers whether Hillis or Lieutenant Governor Charles M. Dawson, a Republican, would succeed Schricker if his election is voided. Governor Schricker, who won the office by only 3,963 votes yesterday, hurried back to Indianapolis from Washington, D.C. He left Washington a few hours before he was to have been guest of honor at a luncheon. Schricker attributed his hurried return to the GOP state committee's action in the contest. Reports were voiced, however, even on the Senate floor, that the Republicans had planned to take over his office while he was away. Schricker said he knew nothing of this. According to the reports, the Republicans had planned to call the Senate to order and ask Lieutenant Governor Dawson to take some action about a strike at Auburn, Indiana. The county commissioners will start tomorrow to pare more than $2 million from the total 1941 budget request of $23,099,000 submitted by department heads. Today, the commissioners will finish hearings. The department heads explain their requests. Clayton Smith, president of the county board, declared yesterday that salary cuts of employees totaling at least $500,000 must be made to help balance the 1941 budget. This reduction will be made either by ordering 2 weeks payless vacations for all employees or making graduated pay cuts ranging from 4% on lower salaries to 10% in the higher brackets, Smith added. The remainder of the reduction will be accompanied largely by denying departmental requests for increases over the 1940 appropriations, Smith said. The requested increases totaled about $1 million after allowing for non-recurring election expense occasioned by the 1940 elections. Pay cuts appear to be the only way out, Smith said. Department heads in most cases won't cut their appropriations, so the county board will have to do it. The Finance Committee expects to submit a balanced budget totaling less than $21 million to the county board Monday. Although tentative estimates made by the county comptroller and county auditor placed 1941 revenues at only $17.5 million, these estimates are considered conservative and probably will be raised to more than $20 million in the final budget, officials explained. Parole board officials said yesterday the release of George McNeil, a parole violator whose extradition to Illinois was denied Monday by Governor Ralph L. Carr of Colorado, is in keeping with previous refusals by Colorado to cooperate with Illinois in dealing with criminals. At the Chicago office of the parole board, McNeil's record was given. He was sentenced to prison for 1 year to life for robbery in Williamson County and was received at the Pontiac Reformatory August 2, 1934. He was paroled August 15, 1936, and permitted to go to Boulder, Colorado to take a job. He was reported as missing and a warrant was issued for his arrest as a violator December 20, 1937. Illinois authorities later learned he was in prison in Colorado. They said Governor Carr insisted on being informed of all the facts about McNeil's crime and imprisonment in Illinois and refused to honor an extradition request without additional facts. No messenger was sent for McNeil because there was no assurance the prisoner would be given into his custody, it was explained, so McNeil was allowed to go free on Monday. Balloting to determine whether the members of the Farm Equipment Workers Organizing Committee will authorize a strike at the McCormick Works of the International Harvester Company was started yesterday in Union headquarters at 1110 South Oakley Boulevard. The voting will end at 10 o'clock tonight. The union, a CIO affiliate, has been negotiating for more than a week with company officials. Grand Oaks union chairman said there will be another conference tomorrow after a result of the vote is known. The union is demanding wage increases, minimum rates of 75 cents an hour for men and 65 cents for women, and no piecework. Two of the Harvester Company plants at Rock Falls and East Moline already are tied up by CIO strikes. Gerald Field, National Secretary of the Farm Equipment Workers, said his organization would insist on the same contracts for all plants, although the official bargaining agents at some plants are independent unions. David Rodley, a federal labor conciliator, was seeking yesterday to find a basis for a settlement. A jury in the court of Judge Joseph A. Graber last night found Hugh Greer Carruthers, head of the Neological New Logic Foundation at 32 West Randolph Street, guilty of the rape of a girl 12 years old and fixed his punishment at 10 years in prison. In their verdict, the 5 women and 7 men of the jury expressed their belief that Carruthers, who is 54 years old instead of 74 as he claimed. The jury was out for 4.5 hours, and it was learned the members were in agreement throughout as to his guilt, but at odds over his punishment. Carruthers has represented himself as a former priest in a Buddhist lamasery in Tibet known as Kumbum. The rape occurred in his office on July 30th after the girl had been taken there by relatives for treatment. A number of women members of the foundation were in court to hear the verdict, and some of them wept. There was no other demonstration, the judge having warned the audience none would be permitted. The bonds of the convicted man, which had been fixed at $10,000 previously, were increased to $25,000, and he was kept in jail because of his inability to furnish the larger amount immediately. A motion for a new trial will be argued before Judge Graber on Friday. "This is terrible," said Carruthers. "An innocent man has been convicted. I have just begun the fight." Before being led to a cell, he was allowed to speak briefly to his wife, who refused to discuss the nature of their interview. In his closing argument, Assistant State's Attorney Sam Friedman asked for a fair and proper verdict and excoriated Carruthers as a man who would not tell the truth. "There is not one word of testimony to contradict the little girl's story," he said. "All you have heard is a bolstered story of attempted blackmail. Whose testimony will you believe, hers or that of an ex-convict? Carruthers perjured himself and would not even tell you his real name." During the trial, the state introduced testimony to show that Carruthers, then known as Carter Borum, was sentenced in 1921 to 6 to 12 years in Dannemora, New York, prison for robbery. His age then was given as 33 years old. Carruthers insisted on the stand that he did not rape the girl, asserting he had only examined her and dismissed her from the office. Cecilia Larson, 11 years old, was killed yesterday when she was struck by the Burlington Railroad Zephyr traveling at an estimated speed of 90 miles an hour at the Forest Avenue crossing in Downers Grove. She was hurled 98 feet. Her sister Marianne, age 9, escaped a similar fate by her presence of mind. The girls were walking hand in hand to their home at 4915 Saratoga Avenue in the suburb when the train bore down on them. Marianne jerked her hand free from Cecilia's grasp and leaped back. Cecilia also saw the train but ran forward and was struck. Police said the crossing gates were down and the warning signals working. The gates bar street traffic, but according to police, do not cover the sidewalk on which the girls were walking. A white Spitz puppy was rescued yesterday from a floating ice cake in the river at Orleans Street by 2 firemen, a city bridge tender, and a city electrician. The firemen, Richard O'Connor and Ernest Verdon of the fireboat Fred A. Bussey, took a small boat and rowed after the dog. The dog, apparently frightened, began scrambling for shore, leaping from one ice cake to another. He was pulled to safety by Wilfred Cleary, the electrician, dried off and warmed in the office of bridge tender J.C. Siebert, and finally turned over to the Anti-Cruelty Society. Plans for a $1,750,000 Congress Street Bridge across the Chicago River as a link in the proposed Congress Street Superhighway were announced yesterday by Ralph H. Burke, Deputy Commissioner of Subways and Superhighways. Application to build the bridge is being made to the United States War Department and the State Division of Waterways, Burke said. The proposed bridge would be of the bascule type, 214 feet long and 107 feet wide. It would be built in 2 sections, each with 4 lanes for vehicle traffic and a sidewalk. If plans for financing the superhighway are worked out jointly by the city, county, state, and federal governments, construction of the bridge will start next fall. And in sports, Boston, Massachusetts, January 21st. Apparently freshened by an overnight stay on the farm, Herb Cain paced the Boston Bruins to a 4-3 overtime victory over the New York Rangers tonight by scoring twice and assisting for a tying goal before more than 15,000 in the Boston Garden. The triumph lifted the Bruins, undefeated in their last 12 games over Detroit, into second place in the National Hockey League. Kane, sent down to the Hershey American League farm on Sunday, was recalled yesterday when Woody Dumart went to the sidelines with a knee injury. He did not hit his scoring stride until the third period tonight when his initial goal tied the score at 2-2. Less than a minute later, he aided Bobby Bauer in giving the Bruins their first lead of the game, but it was wiped out almost immediately by Phil Watson. During the 7th minute of overtime, Kane darted inside of defenseman Ott Heller in time to take Milt Schmidt's forward pass and clinch the game by driving the puck past goalie Davey Kerr. The first place of Oshkosh All-Stars will meet the Chicago Bruins in the 132nd Regiment Armory, Madison and Rockwell Streets tonight in a National Basketball League contest, which marks the halfway mark in the 24-game schedule. On the Oshkosh team are Edwin Prossi and Bob Carpenter, former college All-Star players, Leroy Edwards, who has led the league in scoring 3 consecutive years, Charlie Shipp, named All-League Guard 3 years running, Tommy Nisbet, Harvey Boy and former star at the University of Illinois, and Herman Witasek, Giant Guard, who is among the league's high scorers. The Bruins are determined to start a winning streak after dropping 6 of their last 7 league games. In addition to the necessity of breaking their slump if they are to be in the league playoffs, the Chicago Five has a score to settle with its opponents. A week ago Saturday, the two teams met in Oshkosh and the Bruins lost 43-36 after leading 30-24 at halftime. Lou Novikov, the rugged slugger who is going to play left field for the Cubs and, 'tis forecast and hoped, bat a million, got out of his greasy overalls in Long Beach, California yesterday and prepared to take up hazardous work in an oil well gang. Word to this effect came from the Pacific Coast yesterday, but brought no confirmation from the Cubs office, which had asked the minor league star to refrain from arduous pursuits, including the comparative mild winter baseball. Friends of Novikov, who, by the way, hasn't signed his Cub contract, professed to be alarmed at Lou's reported determination to resume his dangerous trade as an oil driller. According to reports from Southern California, Novikov explained he had run fresh out of paper money and his cupboard was bare or approximately so. Minor league records revealed that he made in the neighborhood of $3,500 with the Los Angeles club last summer. He, his wife, and children live in a $35 a month house in Long Beach. Lou has what is known in Hollywood as an agent or personal advisor, a man named Rogers. James T. Gallagher, general manager of the Cubs, said he had heard indirectly that Novikov was threatening to take up manual labor. He added that he had no direct word from the player since his contract was sent to him early this month and no request for a salary advance. According to the national magazines, which have been printing pieces about Novikov recently, Lou plays a beautiful harmonica. It is known, however, that Hollywood is full of excellent harmonica players, and there has been an overflow of harmonica artists over virtually all of Southern California. Well-advised musicians admitted yesterday it would be difficult for Lou to restock his bare cupboard through his harmonica talent. Lou also does a striptease to exhibit his wonderful muscular development, but there is practically no market for male stripteasers, according to booking agents. The list of Cub non-signers was reduced to 19 yesterday with the receipt of the document of Eddie Waitkus, the young man who will be the Cubs' regular first baseman in 1941, according to predictions of Roy Johnson, his manager at Tulsa last year. Roy was Cub first base coach for 5 years prior to last season and knows much of the Cubs' requirements. Many other baseball observers say Waitkus is a cinch to beat out Zeke Bonura, Rip Russell, and Phil Cavarretta, all of whom, incidentally, are unsigned. The White Sox yesterday announced the names of players who will compose the 3 Pasadena groups. The list of those departing from Chicago on February 21st includes 11 pitchers, catcher Mike Tresh, and infielders Bob Kennedy, Don Calloway, and Skeeter Webb. Simultaneously, 11 others will go direct to Pasadena from their winter bases. This shipment will include the Fat Man detachment composed of Julius Solters, Eddie Smith, and Taft Wright, who will have just completed 3 weeks of sweating at Hot Springs, Arkansas. More than a week later, Luke Appling, Chester Hedgeduck, Bill Knickerbocker, Mike Krevich, Joe Cool, Warren Lorenz, Larry Rosenthal, Dave Short, and Thurman Tucker will be due into Pasadena. Manager Jimmy Dykes will be in Chicago the first of next week and will proceed to Pasadena after a few days' visit here. Jim will order the Indian clubs varnished and otherwise conditioned as soon as he reaches Pasadena. Vice President Harry Grabiner is now at Arrowhead Springs, California with no baseball worries, seeing as everybody is signed except relief pitchers Pete Appleton and Clint Brown. Bob Feller signed a record-breaking contract in Cleveland yesterday and dreamed about it in Chicago last night. The 22-year-old star of the Indians, after signing a document in the Ohio metropolis calling for a reported $30,000, took a westbound plane and arrived in Chicago in time for a good night's sleep. Feller would not confirm nor deny that his 1941 contract calls for $30,000, which would be more than any pitcher in the game's history has received for one season's work. After declaring he was happy at coming to terms with the Cleveland club, he went to the home of friends. He plans to go to Des Moines tomorrow. If Feller's victories next season equal his 1940 record, he'll get $1,111 for each game he wins. The $27,500 the Boston Red Sox once paid Bob Lefty Grove is expected generally in baseball circles as the most previously given a pitcher. Alva Bradley, president of the club, announced in Cleveland that Feller received a substantial increase but no bonus clause. Bradley said he didn't believe in such clauses. The front office exuded cheer. C.C. Slepnicka, Indians vice president who brought Feller in from the Iowa cornfield 6 years ago, threw an arm around the pitcher and observed, "This is an event in baseball whether you know it or not." Last year, Feller was paid $26,000 or more and won 27 games. He declined to guess how many he'd capture in 1941, but commented, "I don't care how many I win, just so we win the pennant." Feller expressed only one regret. "I've spent all winter figuring how to pitch to Hank Greenberg, and now he'll probably be called in the draft." Feller himself stands 2,857th in a Cleveland district with 3,814 registrants. The Indians also signed third baseman Ken Keltner yesterday. Boston, Massachusetts, January 21st. The Boston Red Sox today reported the signing of southpaw Bob Grove along with Herb Hash, young right-handed pitcher, and Paul Campbell, a first baseman called up from the Louisville American Association Club. Although Grove is about to start his 17th American League season, his 8th with the Red Sox, manager Joe Cronin has been counting upon him to start once a week and turn in at least a dozen victories. Miami, Florida, January 21st. Rube Marquard, the New York Giants' great southpaw of 30 years ago, now working here as a mutual clerk for $8 a day, declared this afternoon his top salary was $8,500 back in 1911, 12, and 13. When informed Bob Feller had signed for $30,000, Marquard said, "I came into the game 15 years too early. They're paying bat boys nowadays what I got. But we played the game for the love of it then. There's too much commercialism in baseball today, but more power to Feller. The kid's great and deserves all of it. With the hot pace set today, you can't last long." Detroit, Michigan, January 21st. Hank Greenberg, Detroit Tiger outfielder and the American League's most valuable player in 1940, will be sent his military draft questionnaire next week, officials of the board where he is registered announced today. Greenberg has number 621. And that is sports, and that is news as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chopp reporting on Wednesday, January 22nd, 1941. Have a swell day.